We have some breaking news now on the continuing airstrikes in Syria. U.S. officials tell NBC News that for the third time in 2 days, French and other coalition aircraft launched airstrikes against Islamic State targets tonight near Raqqa, which of course is the ISIS headquarters area in Syria. And today, in Washington, the push for war grew louder among Republicans and got an assist from most of the American reporters at the president's press conference today in Turkey.
I guess the question is, and if you'll forgive the language, is why can't we take out these bastards?
The president said an American ground war against the Islamic State would be a mistake.
There have been a few who suggested that we should put large numbers of U.S. troops on the ground. It is not just my view, but the view of my closest military and civilian advisors that that would be a mistake.
Joining us now, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, a senior fellow with the London Center for Policy Research, who served as an intelligence officer in the Army, and also with us, Phyllis Bennis, a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, and author of Understanding ISIS and the New Global War on Terror, a primer. Anthony Shaffer, do you hear anything in the strategies being suggested as alternatives to what the president is doing, anything that would be more effective than what the president is doing?
I think we have to understand, Lawrence, that there are things we must do regarding quote-unquote boots on the ground. It doesn't have to be U.S. boots on the ground, and I've said this amongst my conservative friends on Capitol Hill time and time again. We have trained the Arab armies, and your previous guest talked about the Sunni-Shia issue. We have to train a Sunni force which is going to be representative and accepted by the populations. We have to go back in and help resettle the land which ISIS has taken over. We proposed a NATO, London Center for Policy Research proposed a NATO-type organization led by Egypt, Jordan, funded privately by the Saudis. And the idea here is to actually work with compatible boots on the ground that will be accepted by the population, not by U.S. boots. So I really don't understand the conservatives' call for quote-unquote boots on the ground. It should not be U.S. boots on the ground. The moment we show up, we become the issue, we become the target, and nothing will be resolved.
Phyllis Bennis, war talk has started once again in Washington. We've heard it many times since 9/11, and there's something awfully repetitive about it. And it seems pretty consistent that everyone who is supporting the boots on the ground concept today was very much in favor of sending all those boots into Iraq.
That's absolutely right, Lawrence. I think, though, that one of the problems is the range of discussion is actually quite narrow. We're hearing about boots on the ground or not boots on the ground. Everybody is assuming that, of course, airstrikes go forward. The reality is we have used military force in what we called a war against terror for almost 15 years now, and clearly it's failed. We saw the failure in Paris on Friday night. We saw the failure in Beirut on Thursday night. We saw the failure in Ankara several weeks ago. So we're seeing the failure of using military force of a variety of kinds, boots on the ground, not boots on the ground, other people's boots on the ground, sneakers on the ground from special forces, airstrikes, drone strikes. None of that has worked. At the end of the day, I think the reality is that terrorism survives war very well. People don't. We have the terrorism continuing, and yet hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in these wars. I think we need to try something else. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be as dramatic as sending the bombers. I think that, unfortunately, President Hollande seems to be channeling President George W. Bush in saying that we will go to war without mercy, that we must go to war against this crime, that you can go to war against terrorism, and it's a war of vengeance. It's not a war of justice. I think that's a huge problem.
Let's listen to what Jeb Bush said this morning on Morning Joe.
This is the war of our time, and we cannot do this by leading from behind.
Are you willing to say this morning that we are going to have to send our forces over there and fight this battle alongside our allies?
Absolutely we are, and we need to have a strategy. It needs to be clearly defined. It needs to be a strategy where we fight to win and then we pull out.
We fight to win and then we pull out. Your reaction to that, Colonel Shaffer?
Well, look, I disagree with a little bit about the whole terror issue. We have won every battle in the battlefield. What we have to understand is terrorism is drawn to ungoverned space. Libya has now become chaos. Syria is chaos. Afghanistan, where the 9/11 attacks were planned from, was chaos. I think we have to understand that we have to worry about trying to bring order, governance to these areas. It doesn't have to be governance we accept. For example, the Taliban need to find a way to reconcile with Afghanistan. We should be out of that. Well, I don't care which governance is there as long as they don't attack us. That should be the issue. If we could work with the folks locally to come to that conclusion, to include Iraq, I don't care what governance is there as long as they choose to not be radicals and attack us. And I think this is where we have to be a lot more clear on how we go forward on this. It's not simply about terrorism. It's about trying to reestablish order within the construct of these nations so people who live there
talk about
can
Saudi
be
Arabia as not being an extremist element here, I think that you're really deluding yourself. Saudi Arabia not only is extremist in its own policies, it decapitates people. It uses beheadings just like ISIS does.
They don't attack us, though, and that's the issue I'm talking about.
I'm talking about what they do to their own people and people in the region. And I think that for us not to care about that,
why do we care?
I care about because we are human beings and they are human beings. Are we going to invade Saudi Arabia
because they don't hold our values?
No, I think that we stop sending them $60 billion worth of weapons that end up in the hands of extremists and that they use against
Saudi Arabia does not furnish extremist weapons.
No, the Saudi is the biggest source from outside beyond the oil income and beyond the taxes.
I agree with you. Saudi Arabia is the source for Wahhabism, which is the underlying current,
it's also the source of money for
forward.
ISIS. I think that's a given. It's also a source for weapons to everybody and their brother in Syria who says that they're
money
against
to ISIS.
Also, Saudi did too. Saudi has furnished money and weapons to Al Qaeda. We know that the 9/11 bombers were overwhelmingly Saudi.
Absolutely.
2 of them were Egyptian. So, you know, this is not a government that we should be, in my view, supporting. I'm just saying that the notion that you can sort of declare we're going to have these good guys that we think are good guys and that other people are going to accept them is simply not the case.
I didn't call them good guys. I would not put that construct on these individuals. It's governance we should seek and stability. And what form that is, that may or may not be in favor of our side.
All right, we're going to have to leave that discussion there for tonight. Thank you both for joining us tonight, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer and Phyllis Bennis.